Good afternoon, everyone. Let me thank you for meeting me here at the Grantley Adams, Grace Adams Suite at the Grantley Adams Airport this afternoon. I wanted to just share a few things, having come back from the Summit of the Americas, as well as a number of other meetings over the course of the last week, and also to speak really to the rest of the month, because this is an extraordinarily hectic month for us. The world went on pause for 2 years, and therefore the summits that should have taken place in 2020 and 2021 just did not take place. The last Summit of the Americas, the 8th Summit of the Americas, was actually before we came to office in April of 2018 in Lima, Peru. The last Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting was in London in the early part of May of 2018. In this one month of June, we're going to have the Summit of the Americas, which I just left and which I'll speak to shortly. Next week, Sunday, I leave again to go to the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting. And Barbados, as you know, is now the first and newest republic, parliamentary republic, but still a member of the Commonwealth. And therefore, for us not to go would send a signal that is very, very unfortunate and cannot be sent, especially since we still respect Her Majesty and Prince Charles, in spite of the fact that Her Majesty is not our head of state anymore. And then we have an Ocean Summit in Lisbon for one day it's really 3 days, but I'm only going to go for one day because I have to be back here for a few days. And we then have the CARICOM Heads of Government meeting, which, as you know, we've only had one face-to-face meeting in the last 2 years. So June is an extraordinarily difficult month. There were usually about 3 months of the year that are difficult like this, where meetings concentrate. And I noticed that some speculation is already rearing its head in parts of the media who perhaps might have spent more time focusing on the substance of the meeting rather than on some of the other speculation. But that's for another day and another place. Let me say, however, that this meeting was a successful meeting, not in terms of being able to engage a process for the first time in a very, very long time. Our relationship with the United States of America and the Caribbean has been really forged in recent times by the Caribbean Basin Initiative under Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan has long passed, and I was in secondary school when that initiative was set. And as you can see, I have a little too much gray hair, and I didn't gray young. So really and truly, for 40 years, we've not seen the kind of engagement that we've seen with the United States of America in a meaningful way. And may I set it in context? Many of you may recall that in April, we had the security meeting here, and the first woman to take over leadership of the Southern Command, the General Richardson, I believe her name is. General Richardson was here with us. And then a week later, we had Congresswoman Maxine Waters lead a very senior and powerful congressional delegation. And we brought the heads of government of the region to be able to discuss the very difficult and vexatious issue of correspondent banking. And what's correspondent banking? A fancy phrase for the fact that you put money in a bank here, but if you want to do business with anybody overseas, you need a bank on the other side to take your transaction and to process it. If somebody wants to send you money from Canada or the US or the UK, then they got to have a bank who can engage with our banks here. And Belize is at the worst end of the spectrum, having lost 83% of their correspondent banking. In our case, we don't get it in that raw way, but we get it with people saying, you're too small for us to do enhanced due diligence for, so we just don't want to do business with you. And what that does is to restrict the number of companies then who will want to have a presence in Barbados, or restrict the number of companies who will want to engage if we don't solve the correspondent banking problem. We were able then, and I spoke to Congresswoman Waters both at the summit as well as yesterday morning again after leaving Los Angeles, to agree and to have agreed that the congressional hearings will take place, we hope, in September, and we're just fine-tuning the dates so that we can bring greater awareness within the American financial sector to what is happening to the Caribbean. We also then thereafter had a visit from the House Democracy Partnership with Congresswoman Barbara Lee, who is the chair of the subcommittee in the Appropriations Committee of State and Foreign basically all non-military appropriations, and therefore absolutely critical to our interests and concerns going forward. And that, since she was here, she was engaging with the White House and President Biden on a number of things. And quite frankly, Congresswoman Waters and Congresswoman Lee and others have become our strong interlocutors and advocates on these matters of critical importance to Caribbean development. You have heard me say all too many times that Barbados and Bahamas cannot borrow from the World Bank to be able to finance our climate-related actions that we need to do. And therefore, we've been carrying this battle. We were able, in this meeting, with the President Joe Biden, and Vice President Kamala Harris, and I want to publicly thank them again for meeting with heads of government of the Caribbean. We had, I think, over 9 heads of government, 10 heads of government there, and foreign ministers for those who weren't there, predominantly. And we were able to agree not only on the launch of the Caribbean Partnership for Climate Action, to address climate action, which they will call CPAC. What is it? Let me get the acronym right. No, PAC 2030. And that will be the vehicle through which we will work to be able to move issues as it relates to climate. But we were very clear to the President and Vice President that that alone, as an initiative of theirs, could not satisfy, and that what we need now is immediate engagement on a number of issues. 1, food security. 2, energy security. And 3, finance generally, for the reasons that I just pointed out to you, where countries are excluded from being able to borrow because of national income, per capita income. So you have the absurdity that China, which is regarded as a low-income country, can borrow from the World Bank, but Barbados and Bahamas, which are upper middle income countries, cannot borrow from the World Bank. Now, nothing can express our vulnerability closer, or more acutely, I should say, than what I expressed to them. As Minister of Education, I was busy dealing with qualitative reforms. How are we going to improve curriculum? How are we going to improve teacher training? How are we going to do all of those things? But ever cognizant that if a hurricane hit us, that within 24 hours we would move from qualitative reforms to a question of basic access to school places. Because if the schools get blown down, where are you going to send school children? Simple as that. And therefore our vulnerability is such that we are always 24 hours away. Those people who went through Hurricane Elsa last year, those people, and we were lucky that Elsa moved over us in less than 2 hours. If Elsa did what Dorian did in the Bahamas and sat on us for 48 hours, Papa, we would be having a completely different conversation now. But what is sad is that because of the climate crisis, because of the failure of countries across the world to take action, that is our ever-present reality. I always get nervous to make anything, commitments in August and September, because I know that any time all of them can be shut down. If something happening here, where you think I can be? Back here. You understand? So that is living on the edge. And think in your own personal life what kind of state you would be in if you're living on the edge all the time and you don't know when something will happen to you all the time. You know, you got a heart problem, and you know you can get a heart attack because somebody raised your blood pressure and got your head confused. That's the kind of talk that I'm talking about, and that real talk that we had with President Biden. And in my view, President Biden was the glue that kept this thing together. He appreciated the concerns, and in spite of the fact that the United States is engaged clearly in a number of other global issues, and I want to make the point, as I said, we have 3 global crises hitting us at once. Any one is sufficient to take us out. Any one. 67% of the region we anticipate now, we expect, are experiencing moderate or severe food insecurity. What I mean, that they ain't sure where the next meal coming from, or that they have to literally manage it very carefully and tightly. So that when we talk in Barbados, it's not simply about Barbados alone. This is a global problem. That's why we went with the President of Guyana, and we're working so hard on the Agro-Investment Forum. And in fact, food security was not on the agenda. It was when I was in Guyana at the Agro-Investment Forum in discussions with the White House, we kept saying We want food security on. The Caribbean is who places food security on the agenda. Secondly, with relation to energy security, reality is Trinidad has potentially excess capacity, but there are issues that we need to work out with a carve-out for other entities in order for that excess capacity to be brought. Why do we need energy security? My friends, the first 4 months of this year, we spent over $455 million in fuel. This is a country that is accustomed spending $230 million in the last 4 years, with the exception of last year. Last year was an aberration because of we shut down the country from the 31st of December. When we started opening it up in April, what happened? The volcano erupted, and they say that the gods conspire with us. So that the first 4 months of the year, basically Bajans were not moving. So last year was 167 or so. But every year before that, the 3 years before that, it was around 220, 230 million. We are spending almost double with respect to fuel in the first 4 months of this year, and the prices are still climbing. Now, as you know, in the budget, I capped the taxes that could come from fuel, and we've already shielded the country from just under $10 million of additional costs. And in a full financial year, it is going to hurt us, because it will probably cost us $50, $60 million to continue to shield Barbadians from the fuel costs, and we may have to find other things as we go along, depending on the growth, because you can't take blood from stone either. So we will continue to do all that we can on all fronts. The food security, the energy security, and then the finance. The White House has finally, and I want you to read the statement and think, because these statements are there, so it's not just my words you're going to rely on. And they've made it absolutely clear here in this sentence, building on Vice President Harris's meeting with the leaders, the United States launched the PAC 2030, as I told you, to facilitate renewable energy infrastructure development, including by increasing access to financing. They're going to increase the capital in the Inter-American Development Bank, particularly for the private sector. But as some of you may have heard me make the point in the green table, the table on green financing on Friday evening with Special Envoy John Kerry and the President of Colombia and the President of Ecuador, and chaired by the President of the Caribbean Development Bank, and I hope that you've shared it with Bajans. But we made the point that the elephant in the room is not the mitigation, what we can do to mitigate by building out the renewable energy, because the private sector and them are going to come in, because you can get a return on investment in those things. But nobody's going to come to help us adapt to this new world. And what do I mean by adapting? We got coastal communities. How many people remember when Six Men had houses on that side, on the beach side, now that you see stalls? Why? Because the sea come in and take away the land, and therefore the only thing that can really stand there are transient stalls. And there are other communities that are being affected. We have Glen Burnie, where we have literally land going into the ocean. And we have wells on the west coast that are dangerously close to having too much salt water, too much salinity, which means that you can't use those wells for the future. And we're already a water scarce country. So those types of projects that have no return on investment, who could do them? There's only the government that could do them. And we've said to them, but when the government does them, we're already highly indebted, not because in the region, not because of corruption and profligacy, spending too much, but largely because we've already been spending money on climate disasters. Hurricane Elsa is going to cost this government in housing over $100 million. Believe you me. And what is the reality? 90% of the people who lost their houses are what? Below the poverty line. 95% of them have no insurance. And even if we want to be able to use insurance as a mechanism now, the cost of insurance in the region, especially for those who are high risk, is excessively high. So that we have to find ways, that's why Barbados put natural disaster clauses in, so that if we really, really get hit by a hurricane, we can say, look, hold on the debt payments for 2 years. Principal and interest. That's like if something happened at you home and you have mortgage to pay and you can't do nothing, and you tell the people, I can still owe you the money, but I'm going to pay you at the end of the mortgage, lengthen the mortgage for 2 more years, and give me 2 years elbow room. Nobody's going to give us the equivalent of 18% of GDP, which is about $1.8 billion. We've negotiated that in our new debt instruments after our debt restructuring. And we've been saying to the rest of the world, you need those types of instruments. You need to put pandemic clauses as well, as we've done in the Central Bank Act. And the government is going to have to look to be able to contextualize for the country. We are facing 3 crises. I've told you about the fuel crisis and what's happening with the money there. I've told you about the climate crisis, and we know what we're spending in terms of water and also housing and coastal defense. And I've told you, look at all of you with masks, so you know about the pandemic. You know about the pandemic. And you know what the pandemic has cost us in terms of a reduction of 600 million in revenue in 2020, while having to spend $400 million more that you didn't expect to. 2021 was not as bad, but it wasn't great where we are. We're now beginning to see the green signs of growth. I came in on a flight just now. 3/4 of the flight were tourists. Not Bajans, tourists. But we have to do all in our power, each and every one of us. The last press conference I had in this room, I told you, every person in this airport has to be chief host. Every person in Barbados has to be chief host. You know why? Because everybody in the world fighting for the same thing that we're fighting for people to come to them. And either we're going to make them feel the most welcome, or they're going to do what? Go somewhere else. And that is what we are fighting for. The things that I'm doing, I really don't like a lot of attention. But the truth is that I know that if I don't push above and push up our hand above the rest, we can get lost along the way, even in terms of simple things. You heard me say Light and Power had difficulty, still having difficulty getting access to batteries. I met with Prime Minister Trudeau, and we've agreed to work together on a range of matters, separate from the fact that we co-chair the Sustainable Development Goals advocacy globally. But they understand that he too is suffering from the same problem, because there's a shortage of materials necessary to make the electric cars. There's a shortage of materials necessary to make the batteries. And that's what's killing them, because you need the lithium. Okay? And in addition to that, we met with them also and said, look, it's the Caribbean that said, we feel that we can anchor our security in food. And you heard me say 6 and 12-week crops. People who eat 6 and 12-week crops, they only got to wait on 6-month and 9-month crops. Let's do that. And we need to be able to deal with fertilizer, which is a function of energy. Fertilizer comes from what? Ammonia, natural gas, the gases. Okay? Not natural gas, but the gases. So these are the things that we are working on. In addition, yesterday, I left Los Angeles early yesterday morning and went to San Francisco to go to Oakland to meet with Congresswoman Barbara Lee again. As I told you, they are in charge in the U.S. government. You can't only deal with the executive, you got to deal with Congress. Straight talk. And therefore, we will have to continue to make our case. I spoke on the phone with Congresswoman Waters on a range of matters beyond the correspondent banking as well. And then we had other meetings to be able to look at creating opportunities for Barbadians, particularly in technology, etc. In the same way that in New York, we met with the hospital that we have been dealing with, and who put us a proposal. A number of our doctors have trained there, Northwell Hospital. They manage over 23 hospitals, I think, in New York. And we recognize that there are synergies, including efficiencies in procuring together so that we can have better costs on drugs, pharmaceuticals, I should say, going forward, and other supplies. Why? Because with cost of living increases, you've got to find every possible way to be able to reduce it. I think that the country has heard, or will hear Dr. Greenidge talking about the fact that you can't get around this level of inflation in the world just by jacking up prices and wages, because you're going to put yourself in a virtuous cycle. And what is needed, and why I'm going to be talking to Bajans just as I talk with you during the pandemic, because this is a similar crisis, you've got to have behavior modification. You've got to change how you do things. If you was accustomed going to town in your one in a car all the time, see who else going to town from your district, and at least agree that you're all going to share. You might lose a half hour there or a half hour there, but you're saving money in your pocket to be able to help you do the other things you have to do. If you can grow and your grocery bill gone up by 20% or 10%, and you're spending an extra $20 or $40 or $50 when the week come, backyard, Roy will tell you, he got one of the nicest gardens I know, as a backyard garden. I got a green thumb. I ain't got none. I ain't got no green thumb. But I still grow a little something every now and again. You understand? And all of us can. And that's why I've asked the Ministry of Agriculture to put the videos out there to be able to show people how to do these things. Okay, you've seen what we've been doing with Guyana and what we're working towards. We want to introduce aquaculture as well. And we want to make sure that we can remove all the obstacles to get affordable food here. But we need people to take their own individual action. If you're accustomed going out and buying Kentucky and Chevette all the time, not that I got anything wrong with them, but sometimes you got now to prepare a little lunch for yourself and carry it to work. I don't buy lunch every day. I just get lunch sent for me every day. Not only that, it's better for you. It's better for you so that you're not eating things that you don't know about and you're holding back down the calories. So what I'm saying to Bajans, it ain't us one that's suffering from this cost of living problem. It is the whole world. And I therefore want us to be able, we know our parents knew how to cut and contrive. Our parents knew how to make do. Our parents knew how to make a whole pot full. You might not be able to bake a chicken no more, you got to put it in a stew. Because the gravy, no, real talk. Real talk. Very often when I don't want something heavy, I only eating gravy and rice. Or eating, you understand? Real talk. But you eat good still the same way with the vegetables with it. And if you're going to stretch, we're going to stretch because we are going to get through this moment. At the same time, we are working to see what we can do here so that Barbados can be a place where people who want to do blue and green technology for climate, accelerators for technology, and for biotechnology. And we are working literally to try and get these things going because we're conscious that you can't educate people in sciences and then only believe that the only option for them is teaching. I support teaching and I want some of them to go into teaching. But it can't be the only one. So we're going to have to build out, and that's why you heard me talk about having for us to renew our whole industrial estates. When last industrial estates get built in Barbados? So if we want to attract people here, where we going to put them? You understand? So we've got to invest the money to do it. And these are the conversations that we're having, the partnerships that we need, and that's what this trip is about. Next week, on Tuesday, the Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund, Ms. Kristalina Georgieva, is coming to Barbados for 4 days. This is the first time a Managing Director of the IMF will be visiting any country in the Eastern and Southern Caribbean. In fact, I think the only country they've ever visited was when Madame Lagarde went to Jamaica a couple of years ago in the north. As you know, they had a program. Barbados is coming to the end of its program, and you'll hear more about it this week. But we live in an uncertain world, and we have to make the decision, and we're going to start that conversation with the social partnership from tomorrow, both on cost of living and on post-birth program, how we modify and go forward. But in this world where interest rates are rising, I can almost tell you already the cheapest money in town is where? Still there. During this week, she will also hopefully meet with regional ministers of finance and establish a clear framework and an understanding as to what the new Resilience and Sustainability Trust will look like. You heard me say that the World Bank has not been lending. The truth is the World Bank has not met small island developing states where we need to be met in terms of building out access to capital to adapt in a way that where the private sector is not going to spend money. And it is not exactly all that we need, but it is a long step. I won't preempt the details of those discussions because on Friday you'll have that. On Thursday we celebrate 20 years of CARTAC, and before that we also celebrate, CARTAC is that entity that the IMF and others have established that gives us technical assistance to be able to help us with our management at a macroeconomic level and within the financial sector. And we will discuss, of course, start the discussion on Barbados' future relationship with the fund. And then, as I said, on Sunday, I would much rather not have to go again, but we have to go to the Commonwealth. We go first to Nairobi for 1 day, literally, to be able to commission the Barbados Embassy there, and then CARICOM and Barbados space, and then we go straight on to Kigali to the Commonwealth Business Council. I will be closing the Commonwealth Business Council with Prime Minister Johnson, and then we go into the full meetings where we not only look at the choice of a new Commonwealth Secretary General, but we also deal with the very vexatious issues of access to food security, etc. The grain is in Ukraine. I sit on the Global Crisis Response Group of the United Nations, and we know the grain is in the Ukraine, but we can't get it out. There are no ports by which to bring it out. President Macky Sall from Senegal met with President Putin week before last, and President Putin has said that there are other options for them. They want to look at getting the ports open for them to get through Turkey. The rest of us want to also get the ports open out of Ukraine. But in a stalemate, and who's suffering? The people of the world. And it didn't make no sense. But by the same token, we know that the world is at a very, very precarious place, because one or two missteps and what's going to happen. I leave it to you to think and dream, not for me to talk about. Okay? And then, of course, the CARICOM Heads of Government meeting again in Suriname in early July. So I want to get the country to be aware of what we're doing. It is not easy. My PS will tell you that I use a few choice words with her when she brings me the rates for Los Angeles, because these cities use it as a moment of price gouging. And as a result, Barbados did not stay in a hotel, nor Guyana didn't stay in a hotel. We went and rent some apartments and stay in the apartments. I stayed in an apartment with my officers because at this point, you've got to cut and contrive and do what you got to do still to carry along and let the money stretch. And I've said the same thing for them for when we go to the General Assembly. Not to mention, as I keep saying, too much out food in good fare. So if you can cook inside, which we did. I did breakfast for most of them. But it's a way of de-stressing. You see what I have to put up with? It's a way of de-stressing. And the only thing is, we're going through a rough time, and I just need everybody in the country to recognize that it is going to require a change of behavior, and that we are not in this world alone. At this stage, I'll pause and ask if there are any questions. Anything? Okay, you have a mic, Wendy, so that, and I'm conscious that we're on live, so that this mic here, I'm not sure the other mics are needed.
Okay. Prime Minister Wendy Burke, CBC News. In light of the Conference of the Americas, you spoke to the fact that President Biden was most helpful to us. But this is one country, yes, with a lot of clout, but still one country. What do you see the prospects, given the outcome of these meetings, as well as the
PAC 2030.
What do you see within, say, the next 6 months happening for us as a result of these?
Look, CARICOM was very clear. We don't want any platitudes. Days for them done. We want real progress. And therefore we wanted, and we set up the 3 subcommittees. We set up a subcommittee on food security, we set up a subcommittee on energy security, and we set up a subcommittee on finance, which is the area that I've been dealing with for CARICOM for a while. Those details for their work program will be settled this week. PS Foreign Affairs and CARICOM have a duty to ensure that we know with clarity who and what will be done in the short term. And if you look at the same White House statement, the White House statement speaks to it, and the White House statement says specifically that with CARICOM and the Dominican Republic, they've agreed to form 3 high-level committees tasked with developing immediate and concrete joint and near-term solutions. That's CARICOM language. That's our language. Because, and you heard me repeat it in my address, so I anticipate that hopefully we will find ways of coordinating. You heard me make the point that we need to also see how we can do joint procurement in order to be able to get the scale. If we say we want X amount from Barbados, they say, what's that? Who's you? If we say we want it from CARICOM, they're still, When we say we want it from the Americas, all of a sudden the scale goes up. During the meeting, we were also able to meet with the new president of Chile, with whom I look forward to a very strong and deep relationship. Chile was the first country in Latin America to establish relations with Barbados in 1967. And they have a very progressive and young leader. He's 36. He was one of the time influential people too, which gave us a bond from which to start the conversation. We met with also the Prime Minister of Canada, as I said. We've had a number of meetings with him over the course of the last few days, and we'll meet with him again in Kigali next week to continue the work that we can do with them. We met with the Prime Minister of Haiti. Haiti, as you know, is going through an exceedingly rough time with the issue of lack of security, etc. But all of these things will be compounded if people can't eat. And therefore, our first priority is to be able to make sure that we can get food to people and that we can try to minimize the impact of the increase in fuel costs. We can't stop it, but we can work to minimize the impact both in the household, in the community, in the country, but also in the region and hemisphere. And that's what we're working to do with these subcommittees. We know that there was an initial amount I learned yesterday, and I don't want to speak to it, that has been put there for us, because we are literally going to wait for the confirmation from the others with respect to what that PAC 2030 will do. It will also look to bring in investors where investors are needed, but let me be very clear. I was a very proud person to be able to make the point at the opening ceremony that in our country we have determined that we are going to take care of Barbadian homeowners first with access to renewable energy. And then once that stops, and the agricultural sector that needs it both for the sugar industry and for food security, and a few state-owned enterprises and third sector. Once that stops, that carries us to about 40–45% of where we have to go in terms of energy capacity, renewable energy capacity. Then we can deal with foreign investors and other investors coming in and working with us to be able to see how we can meet our goal of renewables by 2030, both for the electricity sector, but also for the transport sector.
We would have seen a few of the countries.
A little louder.
Okay. A few of the Latin American countries did not come, but we had an attack recent days on Guaido. How does this make you feel in light of the fact that, we're trying to fight Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua?
You're talking about the news story today that Guaido was attacked yesterday?
Yes.
Well, first of all, we don't have the full facts. And secondly, the Caribbean made it clear from 2020 when others recognized Guaido. The majority of us said we do not recognize President Guaido because we do not believe you can go in and double man a president. We made it very clear before the summit. We did not like the fact that Cuba and Nicaragua and Venezuela were not coming. But worse than that, we would not like and would not be there if you invited Guaido. And of course they didn't. Having said that, if the stories and the reports today are true, and I have no reason to doubt them, but if they're true, there can be no excuse whatsoever to attack anybody in any manner, form, or fashion, regardless of whether they are in politics or outside of. And look, at the end of my speech, I made it clear that we have too many other issues in the world, and we need to focus in the United States, in the rest of the hemisphere, in those countries, in Barbados, on people first and not ideology, on people first and getting food to people and getting people to get through this difficult moment. And look, Barbados is very clear. Every year we speak about it. The 60-year blockade of Cuba is nonsense and it needs to come to an end. And President Biden knows our views in the Caribbean. Even though we went there because we had other business to do on behalf of our own citizens with respect to food security and with respect to climate security and with respect to climate justice and security and with respect to access to finance and energy security. But they know our views. And there can be no justifiable reason for that to continue. Similarly, we think that the Americans are making some progress in turning back. Can they do more? Yes. Should they do more? Yes. Must they do it quicker? In our view, yes. But by the same token, they have their realities, and we have also to keep the fire under both sides, to let both sides know that none of us ain't got eyes at the back of our head, you know. They got eyes in the front. And therefore we can control the relationship and the narrative going forward, and we must do better to do so. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
The issue of food security.
Mm-hmm.
I know even before the war started and it was difficult to get things into the island, you've been all but preaching to people to start kitchen garden, plant Abraham, whatever. Now that the war is in place and it's more difficult to get things in, there are those who are of opinion that government should be and could be doing more in terms of feeding people, reducing prices, in terms of food. I know it seems like it's preaching to the choir. I'm talking to a brick.
I hear you.
But what more can
I hear
you
you.
say to them to help them to understand that it is more dire than we are
Yeah. Let me remind us, because sometimes we need to remember. As I said in March in the budget, I capped the taxes on fuel with the VAT, okay, at $85 a barrel, the equivalent of 85 US a barrel. Fuel was how much last week? Over 120, not true? So begin with, the taxes on that differential, the government is not taking. All right? If we were, our fuel prices would probably be over $5 a litre by now. Secondly, we also said we are not going to tax on the increased freight charges, because freight charges have gone up astronomically. You know that even before the war, containers went from $5,000 to $15,000 and $20,000 depending on where they were coming. And from the time China locked down Shanghai, and you saw those thousands of ships outside the port not being able to go, two things start to happen. One, that you can't get access to the materials or the supplies that you need, the raw materials, if you're manufacturers, even on this side of the world. And two, that the costs can shoot up. So the government has already capped that. We have been meeting with the farmers. You saw I met with the pig and poultry farmers. You saw that I met with the farmers from Spring Hall and others. We've been having the engagement regionally and locally. And we've been pushing, we spent the money to put in the water catchment areas. River is now functional. Bordens and Haggart should soon be fully functional. Lairs is being done as a private sector entity. Theirs is almost there. The lining is there, and it's just a question of collecting the water there. We also commissioned Mr. Burton Ward to look for water in Mount Poyer, and we've expanded the number of farmers in Mount Poyer, and perhaps we should do a tour down there. The Minister of Agriculture should do a tour and show you that we're expanding the numbers there. And we're waiting on reports on that water study for Mount Poyer, and then back out by Beaubrun, Broomfield, Foster's area, and St. Lucie. In addition to that, we are trying to get produce in here and therefore dealing with the other regulatory issues that have blocked produce coming in from Guyana, where they may be able to produce at a far cheaper level than us because they have the scale of production and they have access to different things that we don't have access to. Tomorrow when we meet with the social partnership, I'm also going to be speaking to them. I'm not going to prejudge what I will talk to the country shortly about, but we are looking at a few other things to see how we can continue to cushion. But I want to repeat myself, that even if I do a few more, I cannot shield you. The government cannot shield you from the full impact of a world that's gone mad. And it's gone mad, and it's going to be a little worse going forward in terms of access to food. Ukraine has the grain from the last crop. Ukraine's next crop is going to be 20 to 30% less because of the war. So don't believe that the consequences of that war are only now. It is going to have a long shadow, largely because of the loss of production. And then when you add to that the price of fertilizer, skyrocketing from over $200 a ton to, I think, what is over $1,400 a ton or whatever it is now. It's going to have an impact on all of the countries that produce food. Now, the truth is we are nowhere near as bad as countries in Africa and countries in Latin America. But we are bad. And our people are suffering, and we know that. So tomorrow we carry to the social partnership also what I want Bajans, and we will ultimately come to Bajans. We must come together, and we're going to start with the 1,000 most vulnerable families. And why am I doing it this way? Because it's not only what government can do, it's what we can do nationally. You know what the pandemic taught us? That if we try to fight the pandemic based on government resources alone, we wouldn't get through. But we had a national effort. And it's a national effort with private sector doctors, international doctors and nurses from Cuba and Ghana, and then the government sector. All coming together is what allowed us to be able to have one of the lowest death rates and to have less disruption than a lot of other countries have had. We need now to see how we can carry each other through these moments. Government will do its part, both in shielding revenue and in shielding the increases in costs, but also in protecting the people who are most vulnerable. But when we finish, we feel that some of us who can buy 2 extra chickens when the month comes, or who can buy some tuna and some rice and some macaroni and some detergent and cleaning things for people, match people with families. Because if you go and put it in a food bank, it's still a faceless exercise. But if I match you with a family and you go by the house to carry the 2 chickens and the other little groceries you buy, and you see that there's a need for something in the family for the little child or for the household, you can say, wait, you know, I got so and so and so and so, and I can get so and so, and my aunt from New York sent in ABC. And all of a sudden, your relationship and your support levels change. Then when you go and drop it in a food bank, just so. Now, what are the risks? We need to make sure that we can do a basic vetting of families to make sure we're not exposing anybody to anybody. You understand? And we're conscious of the social implosion that comes from people not being able to sustain themselves. And God knows, as a woman, the last thing I want out there is for women and young girls to be exploited simply to be able to support their families and to have access to food in this country. And if I got to come and beg Bajans, I ain't got that kind of pride, I ain't too proud. I'm going to say to Bajans, government cannot do it alone. But between families, other families, and churches, and when we get through the first 1,000, let me go for the next 1,000. And when we get through the second 1,000, let me go for the next 1,000. So tomorrow, Minister Humphrey and his team will present it to the social partnership. It is part and parcel of the overall reform of the ministry, but we felt that we cannot wait for the reform efforts to close because of how acute the issues are with cost of living. Pull this one out and let us go. I know that he met with, and this is how serious we are. When they first brought the reform efforts, I told them, meet with all the former ministers of social care. They met with Cynthia Ford, Trevor Prescott, Dennis Lowe, and others. He gave Mr. Yearwood the opportunity to, in fact, we postponed it for Steve Blackett and Mr. Yearwood and Patrick Todd to be able to have a chance. They didn't come then. We're saying to them that if you still want to get on board, because this must be a national effort. There's no politics in people eating in this country. There's no politics in making sure that people are not exploited simply because they don't have access. And the notion that somebody can do something for KFC, Snap Box and thing, let that be somebody talking elsewhere, not about here. And if we don't come together as one to protect this, talk to your grandparents and talk to your great-grandparents. Let them tell you what they went through with the war. We're not different from the war now, you know. The world is at war with COVID. The world is at war with climate, and the world is at war with war. And that's what we're going through. So more measures will be announced shortly, but I need to talk to the social partnership. I've left Minister Simmons and others having meetings while I was out too, and I believe that it's going to be a rolling thing. And we're going to have to adjust because things are changing. Went to the pharmacy yesterday to get some cold and sinus medication. As CBC's story, I had seen it in the morning. I didn't know about it, about a shortage of sanitary napkins for female, sanitary products for females. When I walk in the pharmacy in Palo Alto, of all places, you know what Palo Alto is? Palo Alto is the place of Stanford University and we're Silicon Valley, where all the big tech companies are. The shelf was almost empty. They had about 8 or 9 packs left and the rest of the shelves empty. I wasn't in a third world country. I was in one of the richest and most expensive cities in the United States of America. And we know what happened with baby formula a few weeks ago. So this thing is real. It's real. And I realize I'm going to have to keep talking to Bajans. You're going to hear me and say, man, she talking again? Yes, I talking again. Because I'm going to be in your face reminding you of what we, not the government alone, but what we as a nation have to do to get through these difficult moments. Now, having said all of that, we're working hard to identify some opportunities for the country, and we believe we can, including looking to train people in areas where they can work from here and do things like cybersecurity and other things. And we have the job fair coming up, I believe, this week for the Royal Caribbean Job Fair. So we're looking at multiple ways of making sure that families can be supported.
On the topic of IMF,
Mm-hmm.
there have been rumors circulating, and I know we're coming to the end of our program and what's
Mhm.
but I don't want to preempt
Mhm.
your legislative
Mhm.
decision.
Mhm.
But there's the train of thought that may have to enter into another
Mhm.
agreement.
Mhm.
Can you speak to that?
I've made it very clear that all things are on the table. I'm not in this world where interest rates rising and ruling out nothing. We've just come through a 4-year program. Barbados must be one of the few countries in an IMF program that started the program. We gave public service a 5% salary increase after 10 years of not having one. We bought buses, electric buses. We have the largest fleet in the region now, both per capita and in absolute numbers. We bought garbage trucks and basically replaced the entire fleet of garbage trucks. We bought and recapitalized PS Foreign Affairs was PS MTW until May 2018. When she was there, she would tell you that they didn't have equipment in Ministry of Public Works. We've bought some. We're now in the process of discussing with UCAL, so transferring that to them and looking for more equipment. You heard me talk about the gaps, that we ain't only doing front rows. We want to do the gaps so that people don't stump the toe or go walk out with 2 and 3 bags because of the rain falling. We've done all of this in the IMF program, and I remember the moment like if it was yesterday. The Thursday after we were sworn in, the first Thursday, Madame Lagarde was at the G20 meetings in Ottawa, and I spoke to her at 7 o'clock the night. And when we told her that we were coming to her and we were going to restructure our debt the next day, I said to her, before you carry people on a long journey, you have to do what? Give them a little breakfast. So that our program with the fund has been a different one. Madam Kristalina Georgieva, Kristalina said to us at the beginning of the pandemic, Mia, spend the money, but keep the receipts. Spend the money, but keep the receipts. And that is a woman's instinct. Take care of the family, take care of the country, but make sure that you keep everything so we can reckon up later and do what we got to do. And that's exactly what we've done. So we were able to come off with some of the targets, as you know, in order to deal with that loss of revenue and 600 million and additional expenditure of 400 million. Instead of running a 6% primary surplus, we effectively had therefore to run a deficit of 1%, and this year we're back at a 1% primary surplus. But they know that with the hurricane last year and the fact that we're still spending money this year, still building the houses and still dealing with the water infrastructure, for the last 2 years we put 30 million each or 35 million each for water. Barbados Water Authority, we never had to do that before. That's $35 million that I could be spending and building the same industrial estates I talk about or in providing additional assistance to people, or even in giving the public servants a salary increase. But we have to be able to do all things together, because if you shoot on one forward on one way and leave the rest, you're going to end up with lopsided development, which will still cause you to implode. So we're not taking anything off the table, simply put. We're not making the decision this week. We're having conversations with the social partnership starting tomorrow. We're going to have conversations with the fund. We'll make the decision in the next few weeks. But rest assured that the same government that said to the world and the IMF that we want a balanced approach that puts people at the center of our adjustment still is going to have the same approach whether we go back into a program or we don't. By the same token, even if we go into a program, the time has come for Barbados to tell its story to the international capital markets again, and to let the international capital markets know why we have had no downgrades, only upgrades. And the truth is, were it not for the pandemic, we would have had more. And that against that backdrop, this is what we're doing. I'm going to probably announce some other measures to strengthen. At the same time, I've got to create a little more elbow room, because these triple crises hurting us. So, like anybody else playing a shot in cricket or walking on a tightrope, balance. So the conversation will continue, and we'll make decisions probably before the end of July. Our formal program comes to an end at the end of September, and if therefore we're going to do something else, then we need to make sure that it's a seamless movement. But like with everything else, I think I'm in the dark when I'm going to know about it up front. Anything else? Yeah. Yeah, a little louder, because remember, you don't have the mic in front of you and it's the public as well. So you might want to drop it and talk louder. That's all right, love. Yes, ma'am. Good afternoon.
Regarding food security, earlier this week, FAO would have spoken on establishing food import and access facilities targeting low-income countries, especially those with low-income imports. Is this something that the government will explore?
We're going to explore everything. I mean, the Americans have also put money in, and President Biden was very clear that they're working with the FAO and other entities to be able to help as well. We felt that that was a good thing, but we also needed a more dedicated program for the Americas. So, short answer, I learned more about it. The FAO was at the conference in Guyana 2 weeks ago. I have a responsibility now to follow up from my end and bring all the financiers who are at that conference together into one space, and to see how the projects that we want to be able to do regionally can be financed. So all things are on the table, yes. And the other thing we've asked the FAO to look at is alternatives to traditional fertilizer. Because if the cost of fertilizers are so high, what else can we use to ensure that we can still, especially with all of the currency of sustainability and the circular economy, what else can we use in order to be able to ensure that we get the kind of yield that we want? And the last point I make here, in addition to the water catchment areas that we're doing, we have said that we need to break the dead pan, hard pan, I could never remember soil. But basically where the soil is caked up, and you need to literally go in and go down deep in the soil and bring it up. Because what is very, very clear, you see Machel Montano has taken up the whole cause of soil renewal, because it's a real issue. And the world can lose most of its soil, active soil, by 2050, which means that your yield and your produce is going to drop significantly. We live in some dread times, you know. And I want Bajans to understand that the government can't fight this battle alone, that this is a national effort. And if therefore people want to farm and they don't have access to the tractors, I've said to the Minister of Agriculture, we need to be able to make available the tractors and the plows at affordable cost, so that people can literally disturb the soil and break it up, so that they can get better yields on what they're planting.
Final question from your Prime Minister.
You sure?
Yes. Positive.
We've been working a lot with Guyana and Suriname on a number of different agreements. But as you well know, Guyana has just come into its oil fortune. Is it likely within the near future that maybe perhaps we can turn not only to Trinidad, but to them for some ease where fuel is concerned?
Guyana itself is not producing fuel in that way, and Trinidad refinery is shut. Antigua has large storage capacity. One of the things that we're looking at in energy security is how best do we use what assets the region has in order to be able to minimize the costs. The short answer is no from that particular perspective. But Trinidad has the capacity more than any other country to ramp up natural gas production very, very quickly. At the same time, because we don't know how long we're going to be in this place. I mean, look at what happened, study history. The world was in a difficult place for 20, 25 years last century. Barbados, therefore, has a duty to be able to prepare itself. You know, one of the reasons why I've always also said that this is the last term for me is because I know I got difficult decisions to make. And some of them you're going to have to make in the interest of the country and the country alone, irrespective of the consequences. Barbados has oil and gas blocks, and we're going to have a conversation about how we deal with them. Natural gas is the bridge to the future. And whether we like it or not, the reality is that the world is not ready fully yet for renewables because, as I said, you can't get the batteries, you can't get the lithium, etc. With Europe not taking gas from Russia, gas has become one of the most valuable commodities, and the benefit of gas is that you can use the same infrastructure to do green hydrogen and to do green ammonia. We are going to have discussions as to how we go forward. You can't play, and Bajans love cricket, you can't play shots to pace, or to spin rather, the same way that you play to pace. You got to adjust your shots. You can't have policy decisions in wartime the same way how you will have them in peacetime when things going good. And I say enough on that now to say that I will have another conversation with the country about some of the things that we're going to have to decide in order to be able to put ourselves ahead of the curve and in order to be able to ensure that Barbadians have the best chance at first stability and then prosperity. And that is going to mean revisiting some of the things that have and how we do things and with whom we do it. And these are the conversations we've been having in our bilaterals and looking at state-to-state partnerships instead of only private sector partnerships or private sector driven investment, because the private sector globally has taken a huge hit with the pandemic, especially those in tourism and travel dependent economies. Okay, so short answer, we don't have that access easily in the region, but we need to build it out because we don't know how long we're going to be in this. Okay, anyone else? So I can go and get something to eat. Actually, no, this